Uh, we are heading toward the end of another college athletic season, an academic year, and a lot of folks trying to assess and figure out what holds in the world and how to look back on the year ahead. I'm Bob Boland, professor at Seton Hall University Law School, partner at Shoemaker, and a board member at Culture and Sports. I'm thrilled to have five panelists join me today in a roundtable dialogue on the transfer portal. We affectionately called it "Don't Get Lost in the Portal" because ultimately we now have about 5,000 people who entered the portal, and not all of them have had a home from it. Some people have entered and just have remained there. So our goal today, if you're listening, is to get some perspective from the point of view of each of our participants, and I'll call on them to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're going to say here, is to give them the sense of their perspective, their view of doing the portal right, or as I just said to one of our panelists, writer, to get it done well, because there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of mistakes that can happen, and a lot of athletes are making it. It surely isn't the promise of riches. It may be the promise of really some bad pitfalls. So I'm going to get away from this without further ado. I'm going to call on our panelists and going to get to work clockwise on my screen. I'm going to call on Carlos Montoya. Carlos, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Carlos Montoya, I'm Chief Operating Officer at OnRise. OnRise is an athlete-specific mental health company. We are the first to market athlete-specific mental health platform to combine peer support that is delivered by all retired athletes, so collegiate and professional, some Olympian athletes, on a peer-to-peer level, with access to therapy by licensed clinicians, psychiatry by psychiatrists and nurse practitioners, as well as crisis intervention, crisis support, mental health first aid, and all sorts of other resources available to athletes. We partner with professional, collegiate, and youth clubs, leagues, players associations, and unions to be their mental health partner. We can do turnkey mental health solutions, or we can collaborate and complement an existing mental health platform. So if you have a robust on-campus counseling network at a school, we can be your off-campus virtual mental health platform for your student athletes. I'm a 20-year lawyer, practiced law for about 20 years, most recently with the Philadelphia Union, the MLS club here in Philadelphia, where I'm based. And I got acquainted with OnRise because the union was, I think, OnRise's second customer a couple of years ago. So I was on the buy side as a general counsel who oversaw player welfare and safeguarding for the union's youth academy. And we desperately needed an easy button for mental health, and it didn't really exist until we found OnRise. Fell in love with the company and joined shortly thereafter.
That's a terrible thing when you like it so much you come to work there. I've done that too many times in my life. So as we go, I'm going to say this about her because she's next up. She is the consecutive Ivy League champion winning coach and NCAA qualifying coach at my alma mater, Columbia University of women's basketball. Megan, would you tell us about you a bit?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Bob, for having me, and Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Megan Griffith. I'm the women's basketball coach at Columbia University, and I've been here now for the last 9 seasons. I worked previously at Princeton University for 6 years, and before that was playing professionally. But this is a really unique time for college coaches, and specifically college coaches in the Ivy League, where we're not opting into revenue sharing and amidst some other schools and programs, or different conferences throughout the country. The transfer portal has been something that has affected us in some ways, but also hasn't been something that we rely on, which is a unique perspective, and excited to contribute to the conversation today.
Thank you, Megan. We really appreciate it. Sydney, you're really the reason we're here. You're an athlete who actually did transfer. I said earlier, transfer the right way. Why don't you tell us about your experience and who you are?
Yeah, hi everyone. Megan, I'm very familiar with your court. Been going there for years. Hi everyone, I'm Sydney. I'm a former Division I volleyball player. I guess that's a weird way to say it. I played at Cornell for 4 years before transferring as a grad student to Syracuse, where I'm finishing up this week. Over the last couple of years, I've worked in student athlete advocacy, mainly Title IX and NIL. And now I host a podcast called Let's Talk About It, where I talk about student athlete issues. So really excited to be here today and talk about my experience and maybe some of my peers as well.
Well, Sydney, I fancy myself one of the good lawyers in this space, but you recently had Arthur Bryant, who might be the best lawyer in this space, on your podcast, and I can't wait to listen to it. What a get, and thank you for your advocacy and work. I get to point to Andy Banse, who for 5 years or 4.5 years was my colleague at Penn State. He went on to Army, and he is with us today. Andy, tell us about you and your current role.
Hi, thanks, Bob. Yep, Andy Banse. I currently work at the University of Iowa. I'm Associate Athletic Director for Compliance. Had previously worked here as well as Stetson University, and then had some time at Penn State as well, along with Bob. Coached track and field for a short period of time, and then worked in their athletics compliance office for about 10 years. And then in early 2020 or late 2021, I transitioned to Army West Point and worked in their compliance office, where I was also able to be a sport administrator. So I've been on the side of helping athletes enter the portal, but also talking to them from like an administrative perspective, and with the thinking through like their decision-making process while I was there. And then now at the University of Iowa, serving in a similar role and capacity, within the compliance office, plus some higher level involvement with a couple of our sports as a sport administrator.
Thanks, Andy. Jeremy, you and I get to work together at Culture and Sports. Why don't you talk a little bit about your background and uniqueness of it, and what brings you here today? And why don't I give you the pleasure of the first question, because you're giving us your platform today.
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy Piasecki. Started Culture and Sports a few years ago. We're a nonprofit organization focused on how leadership and organizational culture impact things like organizational success, team and athlete performance, and the short and long-term mental, physical, and emotional health of athletes. That's what we do every day, whether it's here at the Culture Roundtable, our podcast video shows, articles that are written, our annual leadership summit, Sports Leader of the Year program, and so many other things that we do with Culture and Sports. Yeah, as Bob said, my background's a little interesting. I've done a little bit of everything. I've played or coached in almost every single level and area in sports. I introduced the sport of water polo to Afghanistan back in 2008, and ran their national aquatics programs until, unfortunately, a few years ago, the Taliban took back over Afghanistan. So, unfortunately, wasn't able to continue there, but we're doing good work here at Culture and Sports. And my perspective coming into this is I'm not currently in the college space, but I do know how organizations work. I do know how athletes work. And I do see a lot of things, not only on the horizon, but things that are currently happening today. And I think it's a very interesting time. A lot of people still say this is the Wild West. I don't think it's the Wild West. I just think it's an adjustment period here with the transfer portal and other things that are happening like NIL. And I think everyone will adjust well. And I think players or athletes in general and sports organizations will be able to work for not only the best interest of the teams, obviously, but for the athletes as well.
Thanks. Jeremy, do you want to ask the first question of a panelist? I
Yeah.
give you that privilege.
Yeah, no, sure. Sydney, so here's my first question. And I know that you went through the transfer portal yourself, but I know also in the past year and a half, things have moved very quickly throughout the transfer portal. And what are you seeing now, not only for your own experience and for your teammates, but what are you seeing now with all the athletes you currently speak with maybe some challenges on the athlete side of going through the portal?
Yeah, I think, well, first, my experience was so unique because I really didn't have an option but to transfer. The Ivy League doesn't allow grad students to compete in the league, and it didn't make sense for me to delay my graduation. So that was one, thing about my experience that made it a lot better than most. But I think really it's the idea around transferring. I look back when I first committed to Cornell and I was so scared to go, and my mom said, "Well, if it's really horrible and you're not happy and it's the worst thing ever, like you could always transfer." And we said we, right? Like I would have my parents help and decision with that, right? Now I feel like it's not always like, it's truly the worst experience ever you could transfer. There's kind of that idea in the back of a lot of athletes' minds that for any reason, if it's not exactly what they hoped or what they wanted, that they could transfer. And I think obviously the changing transfer rules and there's a lot more flexibility that makes that possible. But the issue there is I do feel like it's caused maybe a little bit less resilience or a little bit less, effort on all parts to make that student athlete experience something really great at schools. Athletes maybe aren't, spending as much time really getting to know all the different resources and the different people at their school. And then that makes it really hard for them to actually find a better program later. If you're not happy at the school you're at, but you don't really know why you're not happy and you haven't really taken steps to make it better, you're not going to be able to ask, the good questions that are going to actually make it a better, the second home a better place.
That's a great answer, Sydney. And I think it does have a downstream effect. The ability to have freedom certainly creates the idea that you have freedom, but it also changes the dynamic of the coach-player relationship. And Megan, can I go to you with this? I've heard a lot of coaches talk a lot about having to re-recruit their players, having to convince them every year what they're doing there. How and you have a little bit of separation from that in the Ivy League, but probably only a little. Can you talk about the changes you felt as a coach because of the portal?
Absolutely. That's a great perspective, Sydney. I think that this process of transferring and there's no penalty for transferring. You can play immediately. Now you throw money into it. It's such a unique time in college athletics. And I do agree with that point made of that people aren't really trying to figure out what matters to them anymore. We're chasing something transactional, not transformational anymore. And I do believe at Columbia and the Ivy League, like there is still that transformational experience because you are choosing it. And without the athletic scholarship, there's such a longer process of like getting to know the families. And you mentioned me and my family chose Cornell, right? So I do think that's a unique piece that we still have intact. However, we're seeing, especially in our men's basketball side, we're seeing some of the most talented young players transfer out of these schools, right? You're looking at the best player from Princeton 2 years ago, the best player from Harvard, the best player from Yale, are leaving these schools for some of these other institutions that can pay them and still get a good degree, obviously. But I think for us, the way I look at it specifically at Columbia is we have to re-recruit our players, but I think I've always thought of that. To me, not you can't keep 15 or 14 players happy on a basketball team, right? 5 people play at one time. So that whole journey from when they join our program to the meetings that you have, it's really important that you think that out and that they know exactly where they stand in the program and that you're aligned. Because I think when players feel like, one, you love them and are supporting their goals and their vision, but also they understand where they stand within the rotation or within what matters to your program and your team. I think that makes it all make a little bit more sense to them, which gives you at the end of a season when there's that conversation of am I staying, am I going? It gives you an upper hand to say, okay, well, these are all the things we talked about all year. This was your plan. This is the trajectory. We care about you here. However, if you think there's a better path, like let's help you explore that, right? So I think there's like a really healthy way of doing it. Now it's not bulletproof for sure, but the stakes have changed in college basketball specifically. I mean, all sports, but I can say it's really heavily affecting our sport. And I think it's just an ongoing battle. But to Jeremy's point, we're going to change with it, and we just have to learn a lot. Like every month, every week, there's something different with NIL happening, right? With this house settlement, with rev share. So there's just so much changing right now that we just have to kind of keep up with it, so we're educated.
Have you seen the bad side of the portal, Megan? The coaches who've gone and gotten players who've been problems for them and disrupted their culture. Can you speak to that even if you haven't experienced it?
Yeah. Fortunately, I haven't had an experience like that, but I can definitely say, I mean, I have many colleagues, many close friends in the business, people that coach other institutions outside of our league. And Sydney, you mentioned this, like people aren't fully doing their homework on both sides of the coin, right? So we're looking at coaches knowing I have to fill a roster. So like your recruiting period in this very short transfer window, and some people like for us, like we have to admit students by May. So we don't get 3 months. We don't get the summer to recruit these players that went in the portal. So you're trying to get to know somebody in a week, in 2 weeks, bring them on a visit. You're missing so many steps in what a much more lengthy high school recruiting process would look like, right? So I've seen that a lot. I've had a lot of coaches say, wow, like I didn't know this about the kid. Or even if you do your homework, a coach isn't always going to necessarily air something out about a player, right? You really have to try to figure out who is this kid? What do they care about? Again, thankfully for us, that has not happened, but I also think we have so many policies in place that we can't get in. There's a very few percentage of transfers that we can even get in at Columbia and the Ivy League, that like they have to care about school. I think that's the number one thing we're seeing is progress towards degree issues, not just at Columbia, but anywhere in the NCAA right now.
You brought up that one, and I've even talked or written about this, that the great things about NIL are that it allows you to prioritize your academic experience. It may delay a decision to turn pro for a better playing experience and more personal development. But the bad part of it is we also can potentially create a transfer class where somebody has attended 3 or 4 schools and never got a degree from any of them. So the idea that we'll create this kind of level of persons, whether it's a percentage, and with 5,000 people in a portal, that's a percentage, 1% of all the college athletes out there. So that's a good number of people. Andy, you're the person they often have to come to talk about this and to talk through their decisions. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and your interactions with athletes as they've made decisions to, one, choose to maybe leave or consider leaving or enter the portal, and also those coming in? What's the practical reality for somebody in your role?
Yeah, so I mean, we are on the front lines, meeting with every student that is entering the portal. We're oftentimes also on the front lines when our coaches are recruiting these athletes that are currently in the portal, for 2 different reasons. On the front end, like we're trying to educate the athletes to make sure that they understand the decision that they're making, that they have the knowledge and have been equipped with the knowledge to make the best possible decision for them. We talk about progress towards degree issues that could crop up if they choose to transfer. If they're a multi-time transfer, how difficult it could be for them to meet eligibility requirements at their new school. We're seeing that, like Bob alluded to that, in the multi-time transfers. We're seeing that so frequently. I think from the just reflecting upon the last 3 or 4 years, with the transfer portal, it seems like we're probably at a ratio of 30% of the athletes that are transferring, or at least that I'm encountering, have been multi-time transfers, which we know that will make it difficult for them to meet eligibility requirements at their next school, plus receive a degree in a timely manner. On the intake side, we're working with the coaches to provide them the best advice possible about whether or not an athlete will be able to be academically eligible here at Iowa and at the other places that I've worked. And I've seen athletes that have chosen to transfer, after attending, a previous college university for 3, maybe 4 years without a degree. And, I sit there and I wonder, who's advising them because of the additional time that it'll take them to finally get a degree. I've seen students lose, 1 to 2 academic terms worth of coursework during that transfer process, and then sometimes have to get into a major that they have no interest in just so they can be academically eligible. So I get concerned about the academic progress for the athletes. I get concerned about the people that are advising them, and to what end is the person advising them? Is it to try to, from an NIL perspective, and to try to, earn some compensation as an agent, and they're pushing the athletes to, seek those better opportunities and really setting the academic experience to the side? Or if the individuals that they're working with have limited knowledge about the overall impact that this could have on the student academically, socially, from a mental health perspective.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it so much. Carlos, he finished with the word mental health, or the phrase mental health perspective. That kind of cues you up. But we have some things that Andy raised that we want to come back to. But let's talk about the pressure that a perception of a lot of money, the perception of change, and the fact that we don't have a great climate of a consistent climate of advice around some of the athletes in this space. what does that create in terms of mental pressures that you can see or begin to be aware of? And where can athletes go to get help in that space, or where should they be going to get help in that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like my very esteemed co-panelists have touched on a lot of the different pressures and sources. Pressure from the portal. I think, the term student athlete used to be a fairly comprehensive term, right? You were both a student and an athlete, and now you're supposed to be a student, an athlete, and a mogul. These relatively young people are taking charge of an enormous amount of potential earning power in a very small window of their life. A lot of people who are taking advantage of NIL and potentially revenue sharing and other things may earn a lot of money in this period and may not have that same potential once they leave the college market. So it puts an enormous amount of pressure on students to maximize that time in college if there is no pro future or pathway for them. So take all of the normal pressures that any student, not even student athletes, take of just, as Andy was saying, and as Megan referred to, trying to have a degree, trying to focus on your academics. Which back in the old school, people used to say that's the priority, right? Your studies are your priority. Now it's one of many competing priorities for your time and your attention. And making that decision to uproot your life and go to a different part of the country, uproot your support system, whether, as Sydney said, maybe you have family close by to your original destination, and now you're moving halfway across the country. Uproot your groundings in terms of your coaches and your teammates. There's a stigma now and judgment coming from the decision to enter the transfer portal, right? You're being called a quitter, and you're disloyal to your teammates if you want to leave what you were building with them, and go and try to create a different destiny for yourself at another school. So there's all sorts of those different things involved, especially your identity as an athlete, right? At schools, and honestly, for me, it's just the decision overload. How many things are on your plate as an athlete? The college recruiting process itself is so hard. So to take a step back and say, I'm going to kind of go through this whole thing again and enter the portal, as Andy said, maybe enter the portal more than one time in your career, it just creates an immense amount of, I would say, emotional stress, anxiety over what the future may hold. Is the grass greener? Is it worth uprooting my life, my family, abandoning my teammates, if that's the way student athletes view it, for this brighter future? I think, and in terms of resources, there's colleges are trying really hard amidst a rapidly changing environment, right? I mean, there's been so many changes over the past few years. And as a lawyer, I think, to me, the portal is really putting athletes in the shoes of any at-will employee, right? There's no long-term multi-million-dollar contract that you're currently in as a student athlete. So you have to keep your destiny in mind in the short term, right? And there's not a lot of loyalty sometimes on the college perspective, right? Schools these days are canceling programs. They're pulling back scholarships. So if you're in those shoes and you're worried whether your sport will even be a varsity sport and whether your scholarship is going to be secure or whether it's going to go to a student coming from overseas, that creates an immense amount of pressure for the student. I do think Andy talked about, his role is early intervention, speaking with everybody who enters the portal, or hopefully even before they choose to enter the portal, right? Can you talk to them about whether that is the best decision for them, for their family, for their future? Can you give them some objective, feedback that'll maybe counterbalance what they're getting from prospective agents or others who are telling them that, the riches are elsewhere, right? I know from a financials perspective, there's a lot of money spent in trying to retain student athletes, and a lot of money lost when those student athletes choose to enter the portal and leave. So I think there's, there rightly should be some attention paid to making sure those student athletes are healthy from a mental health standpoint and making those decisions with, an open mind. and
Thanks, Carlos.
not in the way of
That's a
pressure.
superb answer. Jeremy, I want to go to you because you're an expert in toxic situations and toxic situation recovery. The portal has certainly created pressures, and Carlos talked about some as mental health pressures, some as personal pressures, some as challenges young people face. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts athletes and how maybe we as adults with some responsibility can make that better?
Yeah, change is hard, right? For humans in general. It's exceptionally hard, whether you're moving somewhere, a loss of a family member or gaining a family member, just changing in work or whatever the case would be. Change is just super hard. And I think a lot of that is being lost with the transfer portal and NIL in general is the NCAA, the member institutions, even the US government are weighing in, and they're like, this is fair or unfair for organizations. These kids are getting too much now, whatever the case may be. But I think a lot of people are missing the power struggle that's happening, especially with athletes. And yes, organizations are having power struggles too, because now there's these outside entities. But you have to look at this almost from an athlete perspective, and maybe Cindy could jump a little more in on this, is athletes before had to deal with, their own families, themselves, obviously, right? Coaches, the university or college they were going to, and maybe one or two other people, right? Now, all of a sudden, athletes not only have to, work with themselves and their family members and the colleges, universities, and the coaches, but now they have, and agents, and they have, sponsors they have to work with, and NIL collectives, and there's so many third and fourth related groups and organizations and people that all of a sudden these athletes are now not necessarily beholden to, but they have to always keep an open line of communication. They have to work with them. So what may have been before was just, a athlete being a student athlete where they were focused on school and being an athlete. Now they're focused on building their own, professional sports career. They're working on building their presence on social media, or even on traditional radio or television. There's so many different things they have to do. There's so many competing requirements, and there's so many different people that are putting themselves in front and saying, I am more important in this situation than you potentially even going to practice, or you focusing on your school or your studies. And I'm 100% sure that students are definitely struggling with this, or athletes are struggling with this, but coaches are as well. As athletes, I'm sure, are coming to practice and to competition, not necessarily 100% focused on being there and being present, because their mind is so distracted with other things. And yes, we could go into how long does it take a brain to
Jeremy, I'm
develop,
gonna be the
for
law
humans,
professor
especially
moderator
men's
right
and
now.
women's. Yeah.
Thank you. I really I appreciate that answer. It's very thoughtful and talking about the weight we put on people. Sydney, would you talk about your thought process that led you to choose Syracuse? Was there specific NIL involved? Did you use an agent? How did you pick schools? You would have probably had a lot of choices. And as we said, we knew that you had to make a change. You didn't have the luxury of saying, do I stay or do I go? You knew you had to go to pursue opportunities. Can you talk us through your process and the various decision points along the way?
Yeah, it's funny that we talked about this, like the being rushed piece. My process was a very slow process, and then it was very fast and like once I actually got in the portal and things changed. So I actually knew as a freshman that I would eventually enter the transfer portal and play a fifth year of eligibility, because I was one of those. I had that COVID year. So I knew sitting down after spring of my freshman year, talking to my coaches, that I needed to make a plan. Either I was going to delay credits and stay at Cornell, or just keep in mind, that I might want to leave. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to take a step up in the athletic kind of part of it, and play for a more competitive conference. So Power Five, or at least it was Power Five then, was my goal. So going into my senior year, I actually was able to go in the portal in August, because because like, there was no one, Cornell already knew, like there was there was no extra heads up that needed to be done. So I was kind of able to get kind of a little bit of an advantage in that way. But still all the way until November, I was waiting. Coaches were, they were going through their season. They weren't even really thinking about the portal. And then December hit and it was just ridiculous. I was kind of traveling all around the country, talking to people every day. Like you said, like some coaches want to know right away. I think Coach Megan, you brought that up. Like coaches want to know right away. I had talked to someone and they're like, okay, we need to know tomorrow. And I'm like, we FaceTime for 10 minutes. Like, I don't think that this is gonna work out. Like, I don't think this is gonna be a fit. Um, it's so funny. I actually went out and did like a mini kind of documentary on my Instagram about this because when I was researching like transfer portal and trying to talk to people, there wasn't really a lot of information out there. So I actually would like record myself after each major step and call and
So
talked
Sydney,
about kind of
you
how
did some brand building around the portal, huh?
yeah, I honestly kind of did it for myself as a journal because sometimes my parents wouldn't answer the phone and I needed to talk to someone, so I just kind of recorded it. But then, yeah, it did turn out to be like a full video and like one of my like people's like kind of favorite video that I've done. But what I've learned in that, just kind of saving you guys a couple minutes, is first, I really recognized I often felt like I wasn't sure if I would be good enough. I was a captain at Cornell my senior year, and I was also kind of a spring captain during my junior year. So I hadn't I really knew what was going on there. I felt very integrated into the community as a student athlete and also just as as a student. So thinking about leaving and joining a new program where everyone else had already been there for years, and now I'm this kind of grad student and I'm just kind of taking their spot was a big thing for me that I asked coaches and talked to them a lot about. If you are an older grad student or even a senior, a lot of coaches are sometimes looking at you to be a leader on their team and to be a cultural leader. And as much as I appreciate that, depending on what you're looking for, I wasn't necessarily looking to be a babysitter. I love my underclassmen, but I wasn't necessarily looking to be, a second coach. And then the last thing was money, which you talked about, realizing that I'm only going to be there for 1 year. And while I do offer a lot of value with that, coaches have different ways of strategizing how they want to give out their scholarships. So there were a lot of schools that were saying, hey, we really think that you're going to play here. We really want you to come, but we can't guarantee a scholarship because you're only going to be here for 1 year. And that really messes with your mental as well. You're like, hey, I had such a successful, career. This should be a little bit easier for me. Those were the three things that I kind of took away from
Sydney,
that.
what was your key decision point? What was it, fit at the program? Was it the scholarship? Was it what tipped you for Syracuse versus your second or third choice?
My first thing was Power Five. I wanted to play in the best conference possible. So once I kind of had, the top conferences kind of covered, then I went into specific school. With my podcast and wanting to work in sports after, Syracuse was the best decision. Like Fall College is really well known for sports business. Syracuse Newhouse is one of the best journalism schools in the country. So it was pretty kind of easy for me there.
Megan, I don't want to make you the commentator on that process, but what's the process you're hearing players going through, and how might it not match what Sydney just talked about? What resonated as right from Sydney's process? What resonated with what you're hearing from other people that may not be quite right?
Yeah. I think Sydney provides a really unique perspective, having come from an Ivy League school where she probably would have chosen to stay and play, right? Sydney, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. But and then was able to go and whether that was monetize her experience more or play at the Power Four level now. And also there's an opportunity for an athletic scholarship. So I would say it's right on track with like what everybody's experiencing. I mean, you're seeing transactions come hard and fast at these student athletes and vice versa, right? Like, I mean, we're dealing with agents now, not even talking directly to the student athlete. You might have one conversation, a 10-minute FaceTime, and then it's on to the agent and the contract, right? Especially at the Power Four level in basketball and football right now, and amongst other sports. I mean, volleyball too at the highest levels, especially. I mean, I know there's a lot of money in volleyball right now too. So, I think it's hard. It's a unique time because I think what we're all trying to figure out as coaches, especially in places with one that have had large reputations of winning and success in strong team culture, right? Or they're trying to flip a program. It's like what matters most in both of those situations or anybody's situation. So your timeline is never going to match up with another school's or another coach's or another student athletes. Like that's just recruiting in general. And again, going back to Jeremy's point, like I think this is just like say similar of the problems we've had in a very different lens now. And then there's just like, and now there's like it's on steroids, right? So it's for lack of a better phrase, I mean, we've always dealt with differences in recruiting from place to place, and whether there was cheating or money involved before all of this happened, right? And now it's like now there's money on the table versus under the table. So I think that there's so many unique elements in timelines that don't match up, and
Maybe
that's what makes this all really hard.
would you give a perception of the agents who you've talked to or you're seeing in this space?
Yeah.
Are they knowledgeable? Are they helpful? Or are they part of a problem? And we like to, having been one, we like to blame agents a lot. But what are your perceptions of the ones you've seen in this space?
Yeah. Personally, with the players we've recruited, I have not dealt with agents. Now, we've done a lot of international recruiting, so we've dealt with like different like handlers or like people that are part of their process and helping them with the transition to the United States. So in some version of like an agent, I've dealt with that before, but this is on a different level. I mean, we're seeing people that aren't even in the athletic space be at representation for athletic athletes, right? So I mean, it is truly transactional. I mean, like some of it's just like, all right, coach, can you give us this? And if you can't, you're out of the conversation, right? And then you also have some agents that do want to get to know you, do want to be on the visits, do want to be a part of this person who's representing their process and their growth at X university. So I mean, it's all runs of the gamut, Bob. It's not a one size fits all for anybody.
Andy, you get to see I'm gonna use a Marvel or Norse reference to you. You're kind of Heimdall, the person who lets them in and out of the portal. As a former shot putter, you'd appreciate that, I thought. But you get to see this. This is a year where there's a lot of money floating around because the major schools are moving to revenue sharing, which gives every school something along the lines of $20.5 million to spend in NIL, which is more than schools have spent, just frankly, unless you're Texas or Ohio State. Most schools haven't come up to that level in all across all their sports. Have you seen the money as influence, and have you ever shaken your head at that? And what are your perceptions around the money and the pressure this year?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the revenue share model that will hopefully be adopted here once the House settlement is approved has influenced the transfer space at this point. Seeing athletes that are, taking those opportunities late in their career to transfer without a degree, taking that risk with the anticipation of that, NIL rev share payout at the end. I'm hoping that it does work out for them, that they're able to, both compete for their next institution, as well as, earn that revenue share compensation as well as receive that degree. But I do think that there has been much more risk taking within this current transfer window due to the anticipated change in rules.
Do you think that changes the role of the coach in some measure too, that with the risks that go with it? Are they taking chances? Are they necessarily operating as thoughtfully as they could?
I think it enhances the risk taking on both sides. I do think coaches are more willing to take a risk and take it, recruit an athlete that, may be, transferring incredibly late in their career. I also think that, athletes are taking that risk because of, that, hopeful golden ticket at the end of the tunnel.
Andy, you haven't gone to a general manager system, have you yet? Have your programs gone into that area?
So our men's and women's basketball and football programs do have a general manager within the sport, but we don't have a general manager for the department.
Across the department.
Yeah.
Have you seen changes based on that?
Not really. It seems like I have not seen like a ton of risk taking, in most of our programs that are engaging in revenue share. we've had some unique experiences here with changes in coaching staff that have, I think, required some enhanced risk taking just because of the nature of the flexibility and the freedom that the athletes do have to be able
Yep.
to, enter the portal after a coaching change. And, we've had I mean, to be quite honest, we've had a mass exodus in one of our programs. And so just because, the need to fill a roster, that's requiring some additional risk taking. But I think, here we've had a good amount of stability within our programs from a coaching perspective, and they haven't really felt the need to take a significant amount of risk.
Carlos, lawyer to lawyer, you said before, I thought it really resonated with me, the idea that we made this a 1-year contract a lot of times because of, or an at-will contract that met at the max of a year. There certainly would be ways that schools could try to protect against the transitory nature of it. And we had the president announce yesterday he's going to have a blue ribbon panel look at that. I don't know if that puts the House settlement in peril right now. We God knows what could happen from here. But you made the comment about that. You've worked in professional sports. You know that when you want to have a player for longer, you make a longer term contract. There are obviously risks with that. Can you talk a little bit about just that contractual nature and maybe mitigating some of those risks by better contracting and some better support?
Yeah, I think it's better support. I'm gonna steal Megan's quote. She said college athletics is getting a lot more transactional instead of transformational. And I think we have to work on flipping that back, giving these players a reason to stay at the institution if it's the best fit for them. I think that schools should really examine the resources that they are putting towards their students' mental health and whether it works for their student athletes. For example, a couple years ago, the NCAA did a study that said only 50% of D1 student athletes feel comfortable seeking mental health services on campus. So what about the other 50%, right? There is, unless they go to their own devices and have the money to go outside the system, they're really left without much of a resource if the student doesn't offer, if the school does not offer an external resource. Do schools offer an athlete-specific resource, or are student athletes meant to use the same services offered to students at large? Because there are some nuances in working with athletes. There are some specialties that come in very handy when dealing with the mental health of an athlete. Is there scheduling availability? I think even if you look on some of the biggest schools or the biggest counseling departments, you might have to wait weeks for an appointment. They're only available 9 to 5. Student athletes don't live 9 to 5. They're all over the place. They're traveling. They're not available. They don't want to walk
that's been a
into
consistent complaint everywhere we've heard it. Anytime they offer mental health services, they always say, "Good luck, I couldn't get an appointment for 2 months."
So I think it's really just an honest assessment of what you're providing and whether it's actually working and whether your students agree that it's working. Because a lot of times the administration and the students may not agree on those points. But I do think if you create that environment, like any environment, whether it's a corporate culture in an office or at school, you want employees to be happy so they don't leave even though they can, right? You want students to be happy even though now they have a different avenue to leave and perhaps play at a different place.
You make that's a great point. You make the point now, and I know we fight the model off with employment, and we're not saying that word necessarily in the college space, but the transactional nature of it. Schools make an investment in recruiting, attracting, and obtaining an athlete and having their services. And if they lose those services after a year, there's a loss in that one. And Jeremy, that's really in your bailiwick of healthy environments. Can you talk a little bit about what a healthy environment would include, recognizing that it's transitory even now?
Yeah, I mean, like I was talking about before, change is incredibly difficult, but it is, if you're looking at it from the aspect of, well, the athletes may have had this support system in place and now they may not have that where they're going. It does take a while for athletes to get that support system back. And the biggest thing comes down to trust. Okay, so the athlete's going somewhere new. Do they trust the coach? Do they trust their teammates? Do they trust the athletic department to uh look out for the athletes themselves and the best interest of the athletes? And that's really hard to do when you're coming into a new situation. And a lot of times, especially for the sports earlier in the year, you're showing up, late in the spring, maybe early summer, and all of a sudden in a couple weeks or a month, you're expected to fully trust everyone in the support system and somehow be vulnerable and let them come in and be part of your support system. And I think that's a big ask. And we're already asking that of the athletes before all these changes with NIL and just the transfer portal. But before there was an idea that there was a 4-year process or a 4+3 year process. Now we're asking athletes to come in a very short amount of time, figure it out, and then be able to move forward. And my experience in the military, we're trained to do that, and we train those in the military to be able to pivot real fast and to trust what's happening. But I don't think the athletes necessarily have that training, and the expectation is put on them. And I think a lot of athletes may not even know that that expectation is put on them. They're just gonna have to show up and figure it out, and also perform at their highest level. And I'm sure Megan sees that a lot as well as a coach coming in
high
there.
levels of resilience, right, is now being
Yeah.
asked of athletes in this process. I wanted to kind of throw it. We're remarkably, when you're having this much fun, and you have such great panelists, you run slow on time. Let me give a couple thoughts to react to, and maybe give your reaction to this. The idea that in this changeable space we're in, the case of Matt Sluka last year, who transferred as a graduate student from Holy Cross to UNLV, played 3 games, had UNLV nationally ranked in football, and then was just claimed he was denied the NIL he was promised, and then held up his season, entered the portal again, and is going to play this coming season at James Madison. Any thoughts on the Sluka situation for all our panelists, and kind of a quick hitter? Does that resonate? The athlete's autonomy, agency, or even the breach of the agreements that you see?
Well,
Anybody
and the
want to
great
react?
question on that to add to that, Bob, is who was the one, if everything was actually agreed to that he was going to be paid a certain amount of money, who was the one who breached the contract? Was it the coach? Was it the university? Or was it some third party entity that had nothing to do with the original relationship between the coach and the athlete and the university and the athlete?
That's a great question. Anybody else want to react to the Sluka situation?
I think it really comes down to the athletes at some point being in control of all of it. Is the athletes going out and being educated, understanding the contracts that they're signing. Unfortunately, yeah, like they are putting a lot of trust into other people, whether it's an agent, a parent that's looking over the contract, the actual coach, the collective, whoever it is. But at the end, it's your life. So for a lot of the athletes, you have to make sure that you actually understand what's fully going on and the risk involved, before they're entering into things. I think that situation and so many others, it's not fair because athletes are so young. They're just now getting started in their life and they're expected to know so many things. But I think that's a huge thing that can be avoided is athletes doing their best to really understand the full scope, right? Like I mean, with that, I suspect some of that is a disconnect between communication between the coach who promised him something and then the actual collective. But if athletes don't realize that collective and coaches aren't necessarily one, that can become a huge problem. So I would say education is a huge piece.
And I would say that the one area we haven't done as well as we should have with, I mean, that's probably always true, is education. Megan, you want to react to that in any way?
Yeah, I mean, Sydney, great point. It's not all working together. That is the major problem with college athletics right now. Nothing is working together, right? So it's like we're trying to, Andy mentioned having general managers for all these individual sports, right? There's not one person overseeing it, but every sport. But like, who can afford to do that, right? Especially when all your money is going to student athletes now, right? And you're gonna have to start cutting positions on staff or transitioning them in and out. There's just so much change happening right now. Like, we're not even playing the same game. Like, we're not even playing the same game, which to me is for everybody that got into this for one reason. Now you're like playing an entirely different game as a coach, as an athlete, as a compliance member or someone on the compliance team, as an agent, as a, a mental health performance coach. I mean, it's just, there's so many new challenges right now. So, I mean, in this specific case, Bob, that you were referencing, I mean, clearly he was promised something that wasn't delivered on. And like, yeah, I get it. I get why he left, but to Sydney's point, who promised him? Was it the collective? Was it the school? Was it the coach? Was it, like we're just pointing fingers because a lot of this is happening a lot and it's not that got blown up in a media way, which I think is helpful, honestly. We need more people talking about these things to regulate it.
Do you worry about that as a coach at all? That a promise that got made didn't get kept?
Definitely. I mean, but I could say with integrity in the place I work at, that's just never going to happen. I mean, it sounds simple in my world, but I mean, that's why I believe I have one of the best jobs in the country right now. Not only have we built the foundation and it's solid and we're winning and we're doing these things, I just really believe that we're never going to cross that line. And there's going to be players from the outside affecting what's happening on the inside. I think all within the right of what name, image, and likeness was intended to be. That's all legal. But like, this is not what it was intended to be, I think, right? So again, we're not playing the same game.
Thanks so much. I wanted to hit very quickly just the aspect we know Title IX sits out there in some undefined way right now. Whether revenue share will need to be ultimately distributed on a proportionate basis through the courts. We have a case involving Oregon going forward. We obviously have perception of Title IX. Wanted anybody want to react to how Title IX might play into this structure and the challenges that go with that, or just the challenges of being a woman athlete in this context.
I can hit on that because we just released a podcast episode with Arthur Bryant talking about that. And well, at this current point, what Title IX is and what compliance means is extremely clear. So, if schools are directly paying athletes money, that's going to fit into either the financial, aid part of Title IX or into the treatment part of Title IX. Either way, they're responsible for it. So at the current moment, it 100% applies, and schools should be preparing for that, and athletes should know that. The issue is the accountability piece and if anyone's actually going to enforce that. So at this point, it's, schools are making the decision to either directly violate the law, and anyone who's informing them is going to be telling them that, or, they're waiting and hoping that the law might be changed. It is possible that the interpretation of Title IX will be changed, but that hasn't happened yet. So
well, I appreciate that. Andy, I'm going to come to you with the next question. I'm going to just at least say that we have a former Division I athletic director on listening to this podcast. We have the sports performance director at a major university listening to this podcast. So we have some great people out in the audience with us on this webinar, and the impact you're all having is a particularly good one from your roles. Andy, I'm going to come to you first because you get to give some advice to people. But we talk a lot about the problems and how not to get lost in the podcast. I mean, this is a question that's going to go to everybody. But how would you tell someone how to navigate the portal appropriately moving forward? And what suggestions could you make to make the whole situation better?
That's a great question. Like I try to advise our students to focus on some of the points that have been made on this call, like focus on the transformational experiences that you can have versus the transactional experiences. Because I do think like with the flexibility and freedom that our athletes have, while it's good, the lack of stability leads to some really like some missed development opportunities, some missed growth opportunities, like the lack of resilience, of athletes. It seems like, that I think Sydney alluded to. So I try to advise students from that perspective. Let's focus on what the main thing is. Let's try to have that transformational experience. To make the process better, I think having, excuse me, like especially when we talk about name, image, and likeness, and the people that are advising the athletes outside of the university, like trying to ensure and I don't know how this would be possible, but that we have reputable individuals that have a strong knowledge base on the application of NCAA rules, and have them focus on like the academic nexus that the student this whole experience has. Because I think what we've seen is from an agent perspective, we see a mixture of people that are professional sports agents that are dipping their toe into the NIL space. So they have an understanding of NCAA rules. They have an understanding of the student athlete experience, and they're able to provide some quality advice. But then we have some individuals that might be just coming directly from the marketing world, and they don't have that similar experience. They don't have that similar knowledge and aren't able to provide appropriate advice to our student athletes. So if there's a way we can strike a balance to create, some sort of, if it's I know we've attempted to do databases or certifications for agents, but try to really enhance that to ensure that our athletes have access to the appropriate support outside of the university.
I've got about 45 seconds, Carlos, for each of you. But Carlos, what advice would you give to make the situation better?
I'm going to pick up where Andy left off. I think you show that expertise and you build trust with your athletes. You've got to give them a reason to want to stay. You provide resources that provide them really good, solid advice that shows that you have their best interests at heart. They will look to you for that guidance, and they may stick around longer than than they could. So I think build that trust, and we'll go from there.
Jeremy, from your perspective, in about 45 seconds.
Yeah. Coaches need to be more like Megan in all seriousness. And what I mean by that is she's compassionate. She communicates well. She wants to include athletes and help them become a stakeholder in their program. And she provides those opportunities. And I'm sure she also works with so many other aspects with the athletic department to provide the best possible, not only experience, but opportunity to succeed for every single athlete.
Megan, do you want to follow up that praise?
One, Jeremy, I gotta hire you, number one. Number two, yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just we have to remember, and you said this too, what's the main thing? What's the main reason we're all playing college sports, right? And it's like, can we connect this experience to make the most sense for each person and understand they are a part of something larger than themselves? I think at the end of the day, it's continuing to focus in on like we're largely all playing if it's an individual or team sport, you're playing for a university, representing something bigger than yourself. You're wearing Iowa or Columbia or Cornell across your chest. I think that's the thing that it's like is missing from what is happening right now.
Megan, I'm sorry to say thank you so much. Sydney, I'm turning to you. I'm going to give you the last 45 seconds that we have to talk about. And would you talk to yourself in hindsight, things that you wish you knew then that you know now?
I think I wish I knew earlier what the business aspect of college sports would be like. My parents both played college sports, so they gave me a lot of insight, but it's just so much different than what they were ever able to prepare me for. I wish I knew that because I think I could have made decisions that would be best for me a little bit earlier on. I think I still would have gone to Cornell, but maybe I would have done NIL a little bit earlier. Maybe I would have asked some different questions going into the grad portal, the transfer portal as a graduate student, but I think I just wish I knew some more about the sports business part, to be able to apply it to what I actually wanted a little bit earlier.
Thank you so much. Let me thank all our panelists. It was an amazing group. We have to wrap up on the hour, but I want to thank Megan, Sydney, Andy, Carlos, and Jeremy, as always, for being with us, taking advantage of culture and sports. Each of you will have an opportunity to post this again to your networks afterwards, so it'll be recorded and you can watch. These are the kind of conversations I'm thrilled to have, and one of the things we talked about, I did the largest high school NIL deal in history for the institution last year, and of course I say the largest till next year when it'll be surpassed. But it wasn't transformational money. It was a lot of money, but it wasn't transformational money to the number of people involved. But the opportunity to get a college degree, to have that transformational experience is still the focal point. It's always going to be bigger than the money in your lifetime, over time. And I think that's the thing we've missed a lot in this process, from all angles. So if I can encourage people to not be lost in the portal, think about the focus on the degree first, the opportunity to improve professional playing opportunities, to receive great coaching, and to be closer to your major or your family ultimately, or your degree outcomes are probably the big ticket items in this. But thank you all for sharing your thoughtful process, the great experience you have, and thank you, Culture and Sports. We'll be with you again soon.